Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. Please, Adonai, our God, sweeten the words of your Torah in our mouth and the mouth of your people, the house of Israel. May we and our offspring's offspring, and the offspring of your people, the house of Israel, all of us know your name and study your Torah for its own sake. Blessed are you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to his people, Israel. I want us to say the Bracha before we read the Megillah. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvah v'tzivanu al mikra Megillah. Amen. So we have community, and let's just read we're going to read chapter 6 of the Megillah all the way through into chapter 7 and verse 8. And this is the Megillah, the scroll of Kohelet, known as Ecclesiastes. It says in chapter 6 and verse 1, there is an evil I have observed beneath the sun, and it is prevalent among mankind. A man to whom God has given riches, wealth, and honor, and he shall lack nothing that the heart could desire. Yet God did not give him the power to enjoy it. Instead, a stranger will enjoy it. When I read that, I thought of this week that T. Boone Pickens passed away. And I don't know much about him personally. I'm sure he was a fine man. But he was also extremely wealthy, which is great. But what King Solomon is talking about here is that T. Boone Pickens lived to be a ripe old age. I don't recall, y'all probably know, I don't recall how old he was when he passed away, but the billions of dollars that he owned could not extend his life beyond that of mortal man. Just something to contemplate. For those who have in their mind wealth is all they desire and money is constantly what is foremost on their mind. I am not against wealth. I constantly repeat that because I never want to be misunderstood. I'm not envious of wealthy people. I don't begrudge the wealthy person who has the giant yacht and everything. I wish everybody should have one. It was wonderful. I'd love to have one myself. I mean, Baruch Hashem, you know. Rebbe Tzimmer would like to have one. In fact, when she and I first got married, I had a fantasy that one day we would live on a yacht. And I had a yacht. It wasn't a big yacht. It's a 55-foot yacht. Not that big. And we had it on the refrigerator. And when we were very, very youngly married, we went to one of those shows where they have those boats. They let us in, which was a miracle unto itself. But we toured the yachts and we dreamed about it. And then, then I grew up. So got a job, and I have a yacht today. It's just really, really small, and I just kind of put it in the bathtub and buzz it around. That's not true. I don't really have such a yacht. But I'm just thinking to myself, I'd like to have one, so we'll go share. I like boats. I like ships. That's why when we go on vacation, we go to see ships and tour them, and my family loves it too, which is why they're so excited about it. So it says, this is futility. This is futility and an evil disease. I want you to notice the language that King Solomon uses, that man who amasses wealth and has all this stuff and has all this wealth, it's futility. It's an evil disease. He calls it a disease. If a man begets 100 children and lives many years, great being the days of his life, and his soul is not content with the good, and he even is deprived of burial, I say, the stillborn is better than he. Though its coming is futile, and it departs in darkness, though its very name enveloped is in darkness, though it never saw the sun nor knew it, it has more satisfaction than he. The King Solomon is saying that the stillborn baby has more satisfaction than the man who's come into the world, amassed great wealth and great great family, and yet dies only to see it dissipate. And so although stillborn child, when we hear people have had a stillborn baby, it breaks our heart. For those of us who have a heart at all, it just tears it out and stomps it on the ground. And yet King Solomon in his wisdom realized that in actuality, that baby is more blessed than a T. Boone Pickens. And nothing against Mr. Pickens. I don't have anything negative to say about him whatsoever. So it says in verse 6, thank you. Even if he should live 1,000 years twice over, but find no contentment, do not all go to the same place. We all pass away. We all suffer the same fate. We all are going to go into the grave. Everyone who's ever lived, everyone who's living now, and everyone who will live in the future will all go to the grave. I pray that all of our eyes see the coming of the Mashiach, and so there's some type of deference in that realm for us. May it be so. But nevertheless, should the Messiah tarry, this is the reality, and we have therefore to understand that death is a part of life itself, which is counterintuitive to our thinking. It says, all man's toil is for his mouth, yet his wants are never satisfied. The writer of Kohelet here is saying that what we do when it says all a man's toil is for his mouth is we're trying to gain our material satisfaction. We want food and drink and more drink, and yet we're never satisfied. You can never satisfy your carnal desire. This is why when we spend our entire life pursuing our carnal desires, it is a futility of futilities because it can never be satisfied. You say, well, I've been married for a while and my husband is not as handsome as he used to be, and I see a lot more handsome. Of course you do. There are thousands, millions of more handsome men. Now, Rebbetzin has never said that in her life, but this is unique. And we go outside of that into the other world, you find this to be true. No matter how strong you are, no matter how much Krav Maga and Kung Fu and ninja skills you have, there is somebody there. There is somebody out there that's got more. Not except for Mikael. He's that somebody. I think it was last week that I just went blank. Mr. Columbu, who was the best friend of Arnold Schwarzenegger, Franco Columbu, passed away. And Arnold Schwarzenegger and he were best friends, and they were champion bodybuilders, and just from an athletic point of view, I've always admired Arnold Schwarzenegger. From a little kid, he was always my hero because I would never look like that. That's never going to happen, right? I don't have the genetics, I don't have the time, I don't have the money, I don't have I don't have any of that, right? But I always admired that. But looking at Franco Columbu and Arnold Schwarzenegger now, they are both, I think, generally in their 70s. And you can see the futility of all that they did. Not to take away from it. I'm not suggesting that exercise is not good. I'm not saying that. I'm just simply saying that from a perspective of what matters in life and what is eternal, everything they did and the construct of the body that they worked on was all a futility of futilities. And I've seen that in my own life to the extent that I've exercised, which, by the way, in the olden days was a lot. I see the futility of it. Doesn't mean I shouldn't do it, and I don't begrudge the fact that other people do it, and I need to get back to it. But I also recognize that as my age goes like this, my bench press goes like this. Which is why I invest in firearms. It's the great equalizer. My 215 press is now to a 2-pound press. So all man's soil is for his mouth, but it can never be satisfied. What less has the pauper who knows how to conduct himself among the living? Better is what the eye see than what is imagined. That too is futility and a vexation of the spirit. What has been has already been named, and what is known, and it is known that he is but a man. He cannot contend with one who is mightier than he. There are many things that increase futility. How does it benefit man? Who can possibly know what is good for man in the life during the short span of his futile existence, which he should consider like a shadow? Who can tell a man what will be after him? Who can tell a man what will be after him beneath the sun? So there's interesting insight to these last few verses of chapter 6, where it says that it says here, what has been has already been named, and what is known that he is but a man. It's talking about the fact that God has already ordained what will be. So we can't change what God has already ordained. You know, I love what Mikhail said at my house the other day. He said that we were talking about that some people out there, some poor souls, may not appreciate or want or like the Lapid Judaism sect of Judaism or the Lapid Judaism movement. But what Mikhail said is they can't stop it. And that simple phrase right there is just amazing, is they can't stop it. That what God has ordained and what he wants to make manifest it's going to happen. It's going to succeed. General Stonewall Jackson in the American Civil War, one of the greatest tacticians of all time who's ever lived, used to sit high in the saddle in battle. He was a very strong Christian of his day and very passionately Christian, as were most of the generals of the South particularly. But he used to sit high in the saddle in battle, and there would be bullets whizzing by his head and cannonballs flying over and stuff blowing up. And his men would say to him, General, you need to get down. I mean, he was the right-hand man of Robert E. Lee. He was a corps commander. It was really Jackson that was, the lieutenant to Robert E. Lee. And so he was a very high officer, and they thought, you're just putting your life in danger. And General Jackson was famous for saying that Hashem, God, he would say, controls all things. My death, he said, is only going to happen when God wants it to happen. And so, right or wrong, he felt like there was really no need to be scared in battle, because if God wanted him to die in battle, then he would die in battle. If he didn't want him to die in battle, he wouldn't die in battle, and that was just that. And that's how he lived his entire life. And so it's just interesting to note, it says here that there's talking about one stronger than he. There are many things that increase futility. How does it benefit man? Who can possibly know what is good for man in life during his short span of his life, his futile existence, which he should consider like a shadow? Who can tell man what will be after him? When it says like a shadow, a lot of the rabbis ask, well, is this a shadow like the shadow of a building? Or is this the shadow like the shadow of a palm tree? And the answer was, no, this is a shadow like a bird that flies over. That's man's life. That's the shadow of man's life. And when you think about that and compare it to history, compare it to those who've passed away and they've passed away 1,000 years ago, we barely remember those people. So when we have a bird flying, when you see a bird flying over and you see the shadow of the bird on the ground, we say, you should know that's my life. Now, some of you might be saying, well, this is just a depressing message. I'm going to go back to the blueberry scone and coffee bar place, because when I went there, they said every day's a Friday and life is good and get it while it's hot, and man, it's awesome. But we're going to find out that that would be considered a house of frivolity. And King Solomon said that's a place for fools. Because the fool says, cover my eyes, I just want to take care of, I want my present needs met. Right? That's we want my present needs. We're not thinking to the future. If your life is the shadow, don't you want to find out how to be effective while that shadow is here? We have that much time in history to make a difference. And our life needs to make a difference. And it can make a difference. And it will make a difference. So it says there are many things that increase futility. The commentary says that there are many activities that a man becomes involved with during his lifetime, such as accumulating wealth, power, or pleasure. And later, at the end of his life, he realizes how much time he wasted on all of that. Rob Pincus says, since the days of man's life are few in number, and like a shadow, what benefit has he from his existence? Let him then occupy himself with words of Torah, which are called life. If you want to occupy, if you know that your life is short, if it's such a brief period of time, then we should want to occupy ourselves with life. That's why Messiah taught and said, those who find me, those who believe in me, those who cleave to me, they have life and life more abundantly. Why? Because he is the living Torah. When we get into him, we get into life. Now, again, we have to live life. We have to go and we have to work and we have to have a job and we have to raise kids and we have to let our puppies out to use the bathroom and we have to work on our cars and get the oil change and clean up the garage and buy more guns and keep them loaded and all that kind of stuff. And yet, at the end of days, the most important thing of all is how we live for God. How we followed Hashem, how we applied ourselves to Torah, the values that we poured into our children. You know, this is, as we said earlier, it's a difficult day for all of us. It's certainly a difficult day for our Gabai and his precious wife. But I can tell you, because I know them very well, because they've been members of my shul for years, I can tell you that right now, through tears, they're reading Torah. Through tears, they're praying. Through tears, they're blessing God. Through tears, they're probably even watching this drosh right now. And that's what matters, my friends. That's life. When we can stand up and say, praise God. It's like the man who one day, he had been married to his wife for decades upon decades, and it was her funeral. And everybody was being quiet, and everybody was being respectful, as they should, and he was sitting on the front row. And when the service began, somebody sang a song, a nice song that was his wife's favorite. And he stood up and just lifted his hands and began to bless God. And so everybody did likewise. That's someone who appreciates God. And we talked last week about let our words be few. That life is going to have ups and downs. It's going to have difficulties. It's going to have tragedies. And if we try to live life in the happy state, we try to live life in the frivolity state, we are going to be depressed upon depressed. This is why you see wealthy actors and wealthy athletes and usually it's actors and athletes. Usually if somebody is wealthy because they're a T. Boone Pickens because they worked and they had a job, whatever, and they worked and gained wealth that way. Typically, this doesn't happen to them. But usually people that are wealthy from entertainment and wealthy from some other avenue like that, the suicide rate and the drug addiction rate and the alcohol addiction rate is through the roof. And it boggles your mind because most of us make good livings. And we can't imagine what it would be like just to have $1 million a month rolling through our bank. I want to know what that's like. I want to be cursed with that. But most of us can't imagine, how could you have all of that and be depressed? Why do we feel that way? Because we have our nose in the book of God and we're living for God. And we know our true joy is not the dollar bill or the big screen TV or for that matter, the safe full of guns or the closet full of shoes or whatever it may be. That's not our true joy. Our true joy is Hashem. And the thing is that the people that are wealthy like that and depressed, they've spent their whole life pursuing frivolity and pursuing joy and pursuing a fun time and a good time and the one party after the next. And the irony is that one party after the next actually leads to depression. And on that note, we roll into chapter 7. This chapter, as odd as it may seem, well, let me share this one insight, because Yeshua taught something here that is being said by Al-Shish in the Midrash. It says, the best course is to store up spiritual fortune that will definitely live on beyond the person. As the Midrash says, I will tell you what is best of all. Have a good name, because that's better than oil. Yeshua taught that very thing. He said, don't store up treasures on earth, but store up treasures in heaven. But chapter 7, I have had the honor, not the privilege, because it's never a privilege, but I've had the honor of officiating well over a dozen funerals in my time. Maybe even more than that. Probably a lot more than that. I don't know. But whenever I very often when I am officiating a funeral, somehow this part of Ecclesiastes gets mentioned. It says in chapter 1 and verse 7, a good name is better than good oil, and the day of death is better than the day of birth. And it's interesting, by the way, that while we're alive, we celebrate our birthdays. But when somebody passes away, rarely do they remember their birthday. In Judaism, we remember the day they passed away, and that becomes the memorial. And there's a reason for that. Someone says, that sounds, to the Western mind, that might seem kind of morbid, but Judaism doesn't look at it that way. Because what they say is when a righteous person dies, their end was better than their beginning. Why? Because when you start out, you don't know what's going to happen. And at the end of your life, there's all these accolades that you can say, look what they did, and look how they raised their family, and how devout they were, and how much they loved God, and it was just wonderful, and people come up and give a eulogy and what this person meant, and that's why we remember that day, because we remember the day that a righteous person went on to the next phase in their life. And we're sad only because we don't get to hang out with them now. Bezrat Hashem, we will in the future. Teva bat Mazel is in Shemayim. That little girl's probably, and I don't know, there's debate on this, but probably looks like she's 21 now, but we're all going to see her and know her. Someone said, well, why did it have to be that way? I don't know. Why was I born in America? I don't even know that answer, much less why that had to happen. A good name is better than good oil, and the day of death better than the day of birth. It is better to go, listen to this, because this is going to, I know some have heard this, but many people will be like, man, wow. It is better to go to the house of mourning than go to a house of feasting. For that is the end of all man, and the living should take it to heart. Someone might ask, someone might be asked, is it better to go to a wedding? Would you rather go to a wedding or a funeral? And most people, and understandably so, most people say, I'd much rather attend a wedding. But the sages and the writer of Kohelet, King Shlomo, would say, better you should go to the funeral. It's more wisdom. There's more wisdom and more life lessons gained at the funeral than at the wedding. And nobody wants to know that. Nobody wants to believe that. Nobody wants to agree with that. And I totally get it, but it's true. And there are people, I've known people in my life that hate funerals. And even when their loved ones or close friend pass away, they won't go to the funeral. And I realize how foolish that is of them. Because that is somebody who is trying to cleave to frivolity. Cleave to materialism, cleave to this life. And I understand, I don't want to be too critical because I understand how people think, but it's really not helpful. Not to mention the fact that escorting the dead is it is the highest mitzvah we can do. And you know why the sages say it's such a high mitzvah? Because when we escort the dead, it is a complete giveaway of everything we have because that person can't repay us. You go to a wedding and you give a wedding gift, and the people, as they live their married life, will say, "Oh, look at our beautiful plates here. So and so gave us these. Bless them. That was really a nice gift." But when you're a pallbearer carrying a coffin, there's nothing that person can do for you. So everything you're doing is 100% giveaway. That's why it's the highest mitzvah and the highest charity. A good name is better than good oil. It says, a fine reputation acquired with diligence and good deeds is more valuable than the precious oil which was used in ancient times to preserve the body from deterioration. Thus, a fine reputation will preserve the dead more effectively than good oil. Isn't that right? A good name will preserve you much longer than olive oil will. It's like the old joke of the grandmother. The little granddaughter came into the grandmother's bedroom and she had her face all caked on with that stuff you ladies put on your face, which makes all the difference in the world. Not that you need it. So the little girl came in, and grandmother's face is all caked up with the mud stuff. And she says, "Ah!" And she says, "Oh, honey, don't worry. Grandma just puts this on her face to make herself more pretty." And the little girl says, "Oh, okay." She says, "Go on to your room. I'll come in and tuck you in bed in just a moment." The little girl goes on the bed, and grandmother washes it off and walks into the room, and the little girl says, "Oh, it didn't work?" Y'all may use that anytime you like. Anyway. The meaning of a good name is better than good oil. It is that to say a fine reputation travels much farther than the scent of oil. We perfume our bodies, right? We put cologne on or whatever, and that puts off a nice fragrance. But what even has a better fragrance that travels much farther is to have a good name and a good reputation. To be known as somebody who's honest, somebody who is the same. You know what's beautiful to be around people? Is when you're around people at shul and then you go to their house and you're there maybe for Erev or something, and then you go out together. Maybe you go on go shopping together or something like that, and they're the same person everywhere. That's beautiful. That's beautiful because you know that when they're behind closed doors, they're also the same behind those closed doors as well. They're the same everywhere they go. When there's cameras on or there's cameras off, they're the same person. That's beautiful. So it says that it's better than fine oil. It says it's been taught a man is called by 3 names. One by which his parents call him, a second that others call him, and a third which he gains for himself through his conduct in life. It says in Me'am Loez, learning alone, talking about the verse, better is a name than precious oil in the day of death than the day of one's birth. It says learning alone is not sufficient. One must have good deeds. For a good name is better than oil. This is one of the fallacies, one of the great tragedies of the faith or grace movement. Ahmet was up on the platform last week before service started, and he said, I forget the context of what he was saying, but he said, he just kind of threw out there talking about something. He said, the bondage of grace. And I said, oh my goodness, that is the title of a book. The bondage of grace. Why? Because when people hear the grace message, which is essentially that God forgives you of your sin through the Messiah, and therefore you don't need to do really anything. You don't need to, work for it or have any type of thing going on to that level. That's the absence of God's law, which according to the Word of God is bondage. Because the presence of God's law actually brings freedom and liberty. So therefore, the bondage of grace is a wonderful title. But this is it. When we have study but no doing, that's where bondage happens. It only is powerful if we have the deeds accompanying our study. It goes on to say here, Ma'am Loez, even for the anointed of the Lord, that is kings and Kohanim, who are anointed with the oil, the holy oil, to their lofty position, it says the good name they acquire guiding the people is better than the oil. It's better than the oil. The oil is meaningless if we're not living godly and goodly lives. And every one of us has the opportunity to greatly impact people. In this particular Hebrew phrase, Tov Shem Meshemen, Tov Hayom Ha Madaber Hayom Hivalodo, the first word is Tov, which begins with a tate. And in the scroll, the tate is enlarged. And so Ma'am Loez says that the letter tate of the word Tov, better is a name, Tov Shem, appears enlarged to emphasize that there is more good, there's more Tov in a good name and a good reputation than in precious oil. And we have to really work on that in our lives. Are we true to who we say we are? Are we honest brokers in our relationships? Constantly checking ourselves if we are holding ourselves up to the right standard. We don't require more of others than we require of ourselves. Let our words be few, right? We say sometimes that person did not meet my expectations. Did you meet theirs? We have an expectation of people. We want them always to be nice, always to be friendly, always to be in a perfect mood. Are we that way? And even if we hold that standard to ourselves, should we hold that standard to other people, or should we allow them a level of grace? True grace, right? It says, and the day of death is better than the day of birth, because the man who has lived an exemplary life and acquired a good name views his death as the accumulation of his life well spent and as a transition to the world of peace and reward, unlike the time of birth. For a man is born to toil, and he is uncertain of how his life is going to unfold. It's better to go to the house of mourning. It says that the commentators explain that by visiting the house of mourning and listening to the eulogies and lamentations, the thoughts of beauty of a life of righteousness will lead to a resolution to lead a religiously observant life and to make teshuvah. When we go to the house of mourning and we hear people stand up and talk about their mothers, their fathers, their brothers or sisters, their friends, their comrades, and what wonderful people they were and what they meant to their life, the person who's listening to that is inspired now to be such a person and to make teshuvah. And Mayam Lorez writes that when we make teshuvah, at that time, it actually benefits the soul of the person who's passed. Why? Because they've led captives in their train. Oh, you didn't catch that. You should be much more excited about that. Yes, we talked about the Messiah who led captives in his train, but when we, through our life and subsequently through our death, when people are inspired by us and as a result are led to make teshuvah, we, my friends, are setting captives free. Oh, man. You say, I don't know if my life has value. Are you kidding me? Your life has tremendous value. It says here that at that time when the virtues of the deceased are recounted, man is reminded that the only thing of permanent value, the only thing he can take with him are his good reputation and his deeds. Each of those present will resolve to assure himself of an untarnished name when he dies, and others visit his house of mourning. As I said, these topics are not the type of topic that just make you want to jump up and give somebody next to you a high five. But that's not really what we need most of the time. The fact of the matter is, as I read what I just read about sitting in a house of mourning and listening to eulogies, I realized that the reality is that we are all writing our eulogy right now. And the thing of it is we have to ask ourselves, what would people say about us? What would people say about us? Going back to my opening comments about the importance of community, I would sure hope that somebody that got up to say something about me would be somebody who actually knew me. They wouldn't just be reading the obituary report that the funeral home gives you. Now, I've done many of those funerals because there was a time when I was kind of serving as a chaplain, and I would get phone calls from certain funeral homes, and people didn't have anybody, and the families just, they just weren't religious or whatever. And they would ask me, and I would go and meet with the families and do that. And I did the very best I can. But perhaps that's why it always settled in my soul about how important it was for people to be able to stand up and say, I knew this person. And to be able to articulate, oftentimes through choking up and not even being able to really say what they want to say. How beautiful is it for somebody to stand up at a funeral and say, I've written what I want to say, and I've asked so-and-so to help me in case I can't get through it. Wow. And we have to ask ourselves, every single day we're writing our eulogy. I know, I get it. It's like, Rabbi, you're talking about death. I get it. But that's life. That's life. And we have to live in that moment. And not only that, not only is it life, but the Kohelet says that's wisdom. That's wisdom. It says, for that is the end of all men. Death, it says here in the Art Scroll, is the inevitable final fate of everyone. To me, among so many other things, but I just want to highlight this point. To me, that thought makes death less scary. We all face it. There's no one who's not going to die. There's no one who's ever lived who hasn't died. We said that earlier. There's no one who's going to live in the future that won't die. All of our heroes have passed away. Every one of them. All the biblical heroes, all the heroes of, if you have heroes of your country, whatever country that is, they've all passed. Most of them. That's the fate of all men. And so it says, if he does not attend his funeral now, he will never again be able to show kindness to the deceased. That's one reason why we shouldn't dislike going to funerals, because there won't be any other opportunity to show that person kindness than to attend their service. And as a result, we are moved, as it said, we are moved to repent. The anointed priest and the king are titles, it says in Mount Loez, that acquired after anointing with precious oil. The oil is secondary to the purpose, and similarly, birth is secondary to death. For death is the prelude to the everlasting life, which is the purpose of mortal life. Did you hear that? Death is the prelude and the purpose that leads to everlasting life, and it's the purpose of mortal life. The reason you and I were sent to this planet was in order to fulfill a mission. We're like spiritual commandos that have been airdropped into this time in order to fulfill a specific purpose. And our purpose is to do God's will, and at the same time to attain, through our obedience, through our faith in the Messiah, through our adherence to God's word, to attain immortal life. Most people get dropped into this jungle, and they get distracted by the trees and the vines and the wild animals, and they lose perspective and think that mortal life is about having fun and gaining wealth or materiality. And that's not it at all. This is why it says we have the juxtaposition of better is a name than precious oil in the day of death than the day of one's birth. There is weeping at death and rejoicing at birth, but it says it should actually be the other way around. That's what Mayam Loez says. There is weeping at death and rejoicing at birth, but it really should be the other way around. Mayam Loez brings down the illustration that there are two ships that pass each other in an entry port. One was on the way out to sea, and the other was just arriving. When the one ship got ready to leave out, there was a great fanfare and great rejoicing. There was music, and everybody was playing, and all the sailors were on board waving as it was going out to sea. And the one that was coming in, there was hardly anybody noticing it. We've seen this, haven't we? The big ships go off. Mayam Loez says it should be the other way around, because we have no idea what that ship going out to sea is going to face, how many gales, how many troubles, how many trials. But we know the ship that's come home, what it has gone through, and it has made it back to port safely. When we're born, we're like that ship that everybody says, oh, look, they're born. Oh, my gosh, how awesome is that? And listen, it's great. I'm not saying we shouldn't celebrate babies' births. Don't get me wrong. But we're saying, listen, it's great, but we have no idea what that little bitty baby is going to go through in this very hard world. And when somebody goes, the ship comes home, we're like, oh, it's sad. But yet, we know what that ship went through. We know that it has a broken mast because it's been through some storms, but it's still sailing. We know that some of the sailors on board are tired and weary, but they never gave up. And they've come home to port. We celebrate the homecoming. So Mayam goes on to say, accordingly, the day of death is better than the day of one's birth. When a man dies, all should rejoice that he passed from the world with a good name, because the day of death is to be preferred over the day of one's birth. It is custom among Jews to observe the anniversary of the Yotzet, and it's not customary to make mention of the birthday. How true is that? To continue our reading, it just says, grief is better than gaiety, for through a sad countenance the heart is improved. The thoughts of the wise turn to the house of mourning, but the thought of a fool to the house of feasting. It is better to listen to the rebuke of a wise man than for one to listen to the song of fools. For like the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool, and this too is futility. For oppression makes the wise foolish, and a gift corrupts the heart. The end of a matter is better than its beginning. Patience is better than pride. Do not be hastily upset, for anger lingers in the bosom of fools. We have to be careful that we don't listen to the music of fools. There's debate on whether or not music affects us. And the answer is it absolutely does. You know, again, everything's in balance. listening to a little fun songs here and there, secular music. That's not a problem. He can have fun. We can turn on a little bit of that kind of thing. But we have to be careful if that's where we spend our whole life, day in and day out, listening to the music of frivolity. Again, it's all about balance. A little wine, a little whiskey, a little vodka is fine. But if we sat down every day, you poured yourself vodka at every meal, at every moment, that would be a problem. So we have to put everything in balance. But the point is we have to be careful that we don't engender in our own lives a spirit of frivolity. Everything is balanced. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning. Just a few more things and we'll wrap it up. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, and the heart of the fools in the house of merrymaking. It says, Maam Moed says, the heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, even when they are not in the house of mourning, and the heart of fools are always in the house of feasting, even in the house of mourning. In other words, when the wise person isn't literally at a funeral, their minds are on what matters most. They're thinking about the end of days. They're thinking about the fact that every time they wake up in the morning, it's a gift. I saw, our Rebbetzin read this wonderful story about a lady, I think in East Texas, who's well over 100 right now. And she's running, I don't know what sprints or something, and winning. Yeah. It's crazy. 103, and she's winning the awards at the track meet. When I read that, I said, take me now, Lord. That's ridiculous. I get beat by 103 years old. I'm like, I'm done. I'm out. Check it. I'm good. I run when somebody's chasing me. But she said that at her age, every day is a gift. And I agree with her, but I would only respectfully submit that at any age, every day is a gift. Why is it a gift, though? That's something we've got to think about. Is it a gift just because we get to live life? No. It's a gift because we have an opportunity to continue the mission. That's what the gift is. People say, I'm thankful for the gift of life. Why? Because I can go to Disney World and I can go shopping. I can hang out with my friends. None of that stuff is bad. But we should have said that's not the reason for the gift. The reason for the gift is because I have another opportunity to make an impact for God in the world. That's the reason that we're here. We can't lose sight of the mission. It says, it is better to hear the reproof of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. A man should always know near whom, listen to this. A man should always know near whom he is seated and near whom he stands, with whom he passes the time, and in whom he confides. This is why, my friends, just hear me on this. You can't make your go-to counselor, teacher, whatever, the obscure profile on Facebook or YouTube. Unless you really, really, really know them as in there's some place you can physically, the people that watch us online, they watch us online on different platforms, Facebook, YouTube, live stream, whatever. Those people, those precious people out there that are watching right now, some of whom have already done this, can physically fly here, or we can go there or whatever and meet somebody who's real. And go to like a real place with real human beings and interact. And and therefore, you know with whom you're seated, with whom you stand. Who I am is not summed up on a Facebook profile. That's not my life. That just happens to be a resume, I guess. But my life is not limited. It's not even limited to YouTube, even though I'm there a lot now. My life goes way back before those things even existed. I used to have a phone. I used to do this. I used to have a phone that if you walked, you would do this. My mama even had a phone when I was young that we used to do this. My dad used to call me into the living room to change the channel on the TV because there wasn't remote control yet. I know what beta means. And I'm not talking about the beta they talk about on Facebook today. I'm talking about the old beta, VHS versus beta. I know what it was like to have to rewind your tapes before you took them back to Blockbuster. Somebody on Facebook yesterday afternoon said, well, you're just young. I said, that's a compliment. Thank you, young. That's sweet. Look, you have to know people and think about who you're hanging around, because the reality is this is where we get in trouble. We think I'm talking about here people you hang around. These are your friends, people you spend time with. You can be around people that you're trying to elevate. That's the person you're acquainted with. Friends with them, okay, but that's not the person you hang out with. Unless you're doing a Torah study session with them or something. The people you hang out with need to be people who are wise people, who are holy people, who are on your level or higher. Your level or higher. Why? Because the apostles wrote about this and said that bad company corrupts good character. It's not the other way around. It's odd that it's not the other way around, but it's not. So here, a couple more things, we'll be done. It is better to hear the reproof of the wise, to keep revelry within bounds, also in the house of merrymaking, as it's recorded in the Talmud by Rav Hamenuna, as he said at a feast. He stood up. Here's the buzzkill at the feast. He stands up in the middle of a big party and says, woe to us that we die, woe to us that we die. But he's just trying to keep things balanced. He's never got invited to another party again, but he was just trying to keep things balanced. You realize that's why we break the glass at a wedding? Because at our highest joy, we remember that the city of Yerushalayim still does not have a temple. Always remember this, my friends. Our life is that shadow of the bird. And during this season of Elul, it's a perfect opportunity to look at that shadow passing by and saying, every single moment of every single day counts to be a godly man or a godly woman, and to do everything I can to do to fulfill my mission on earth. Baruch haba b'Shem Adonai.
la la la.